Today we're going to look at complex noun phrases. Before we start, let's look at some modifiers that come after nouns. So common modifiers that follow nouns are prepositions, such as, for example, he wrote a letter to a girl. Here, the preposition is to. And a girl is the object of that preposition. So to a girl is a prepositional phrase. So we can say that a letter to a girl. To a girl is a prepositional phrase that follows the noun a letter. We can also use relative clauses to follow a noun. So, for example, the dogs that live next door bark a lot. Here, that is the relative pronoun, and live next door is the clause. So this is the relative clause right here, that live next door. And we can see that live next door is a relative clause that follows a noun, the dogs. Something else that we should mention is that noun phrases, something that we can mention about noun modifiers is that we can remove the relative pronoun and the be verb. And by doing so, we can actually shorten the length of a relative clause. So you can do this only for ing phrases, that is, for example, the continuous aspect, and for ed phrases, that's the passive voice. So let's look at this. Let's look at a few examples here. The dogs that are digging holes bark a lot. We can here are digging is called a present continuous. So we can delete, like we mentioned above, we can delete the relative pronoun that and the be verb are. Okay, so the dogs digging holes bark a lot. Another thing, we can also do this for the ed phrases. That's the passive voice. So the woman who was voted most beautiful is kind. Here, was voted is the past passive. Take about 5 seconds to think which words can be deleted from this sentence. Okay, we can delete the relative pronoun who, and we can delete the be verb was. So now then we have the woman voted most beautiful is kind. This is a good time to talk a little bit about something funny, about noun phrases and their modifiers. Let's focus a little bit now on participle adjectives. Remember that ing participles and ed participles can also function as adjectives. So, for example, looking at some ing participles, let's break it down. Let's look at this sentence. The teacher is boring. Okay, here my ing participle is boring. Okay, I can, like I mentioned, they also function as adjectives. So the teacher is boring. And of course, since it can function as an adjective, I can move boring and put it right before the teacher. The boring teacher. Okay, that shows you how ing participles can function as adjectives. Let's look at ed participles. The students are bored by the teacher. Okay, so here it's being used as a passive voice. Let's see how it works as an adjective. The students are bored. Okay, there it's being used as an adjective. And of course, because bored is an ed participle, we can move it. And we can put it before the noun. So the bored students. Also, something worth mentioning is that both ing participles and ed participles can be modified by nouns or adverbs. So looking at some examples using ing participles, noun plus ing participle, the man eating tiger. Okay, an adverb plus an ing participle, the fast rising movie star. Some ed participles. Okay, noun plus ed participles, the flea bitten dog. Okay, and an adverb plus an ed participle, the much loved teacher. Now, why am I teaching this when we're looking at noun phrases? Well, these aspects of ing participles and ed participles can also be used to simplify sentences by moving the information in the relative clause into the noun phrase. Let's look at some examples using ing participles, okay? So the first sentence, the tiger that is eating men roams the jungle. It's a pretty good sentence. It has a relative clause. But as we just saw, we can move this information that's in the relative clause before the noun. So The man-eating tiger roams the jungle. Okay. Um, Look at both sentences. Which one is easier to read? Which one is which one is quicker to the point? Okay, things to consider. Let's look at adverb plus ing participles. We can do the same. So, Anne Hathaway is a movie star that is fast rising. Okay, well, as we mentioned, we can take the information here, this ing participle, fast rising, and we can move it right before the noun that it modifies. So, Anne Hathaway is a fast rising movie star. Okay. Very quickly, something must be mentioned. Make sure that if you're moving, an adjective, an ing participle, and using it as an adjective, make sure that it actually is moved to the noun that it's modifying. Okay, so here that is fast rising modifies movie star, so I need to move fast rising and put it before movie star. Okay, now let's look at some examples with ed participles. Let's look at noun plus ed participle. The dog that is bitten by fleas runs into the forest every day. Okay, again, we can rewrite this so that we move the noun fleas plus the ed participles before the noun. So, for example, the flea-bitten dog runs into the forest every day. Okay, here, flea-bitten dog. We can also do this with adverb plus ed participles. So, Cantinflas was an actor who was much loved by audiences, specifically by Spanish-speaking audiences. So let's look at this sentence. What do we have here? We have our adverb, much, and we have our ed participle, loved. And we can move these to the noun that they modify. So, Cantinflas was a much-loved actor. In these sentences, I want you to see that both the with the relative clause works as well, but when we move the ing participle and ed participle phrases and use them as adjectives and we put them before the noun phrases, these sentences are cleaner, they're more compact, and the meaning is still there. Let's move on and look at how to use noun phrases. We can use complex noun phrases to replace other parts of sentences, such as verb phrases. Thus, we use fewer clauses while carrying just as much information. For example, this report shows that there are more emissions. Okay, that there are more emissions that are destroying the ozone layer. Okay, so here the verb phrase are more emissions. Okay, and here we have a relative clause that are destroying the ozone layer. That are destroying the ozone layer is modifying emissions. Okay, so how can I rewrite this? Well, we know that here we have that are destroying the ozone layer. Okay, we can rewrite this and move all of this and place it before the noun that it modifies. And we can also take this are more emissions and rewrite it so that it's a noun phrase. So let's look at this. The report shows an increase in ozone layer destroying emissions. Again, so we took that are destroying the ozone layer and we moved it right before the noun emissions. Are more, okay, the report shows that there are more. Here, this is a verb phrase, and we deleted that clause and we made an increase in. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at some verb phrases with be verbs and adjectives. So we're going to look at and how they work with noun phrases. Something that we should note is that verb phrases with be verbs and adjectives can be placed into the noun phrase. And we do this by deleting the be verb and moving the adjective before the noun phrase. So, for example, car emissions are destructive. Every year they are increasing. Here's my verb phrase. So how can I rewrite this? This is easy one. We just delete the be verb and we move destructive right before car emissions. So every year, destructive car emissions increase. Let's move on now. Very important thing to note is that complex noun phrases are used in academic writing, especially when making detailed comparisons. So, for example, only 1 in 10 participants who took the medicine got sick again. On the other hand, all of the participants who took the placebo got sick again. Okay, here we have some very complex noun phrases. So only 1 in 10 participants who took medicine, and all of the participants who took the placebo. Let's look at another example. Explicitly taught students had higher test scores in grammar, whereas my comparison, transition that compares, implicitly taught students had higher test scores for writing and reading. Okay, let's summarize very quickly all of this. It's a lot, and we're right over the 10-minute mark. So, removing the relative pronoun and the beverb relative clauses can be shortened. The dogs digging holes bark a lot. We deleted that and are. Both ing participles and ed participles modified by nouns and adverbs can be used as adjectives in a noun phrase. Cantinflas was a much-loved actor. Here, much is an adverb and loved is an ed participle. We can also, moving forward, complex noun phrases can also replace other parts of sentences, such as verb phrases, thus using fewer clauses while carrying just as much information. So the example that we saw was the report shows an increase in ozone layer destroying emissions. And verb phrases with be verbs and adjectives can be placed into the complex noun phrase. Every year, destructive car emissions increase. So instead of saying car emissions are destructive, we just moved destructive before the noun car emissions. And lastly, complex noun phrases are especially helpful when making detailed comparisons. In the example, only 1 in 10 participants who took medicine, got sick again. On the other hand, all the participants who took the placebo got sick again. All right, this concludes this long presentation. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or concerns, please email me, and I look forward to seeing you in class.